Hello and welcome to the Following Truth Bible Study. I'm your host, LJ. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at what manuscripts did the KJV translators use during their translation. There are many different arguments that are used against those that proclaim to be KJV only, or at least say that the KJV is the only English version that should be used. One such argument is that the KJV is based primarily on the Greek New Testament, that it was compiled by Erasmus in 1516. Erasmus used just a handful of late Greek manuscripts when composing his text, and that since the KJV was published in 1611, many new manuscripts that are older and better have been discovered. Today we have a much larger pot of manuscripts available to us in order to get a better and more accurate translation. Now, the simple fact is that this argument is not only incorrect, it does not even come close to telling the whole truth. While it is true that Erasmus used somewhere between 6 and 10 Greek manuscripts for his first edition of his Greek New Testament in 1516, it is either through sheer lack of knowledge, or being disingenuous with the truth, or maybe even complete and utter deception to claim that the translators of the KJV were limited to this text, or that they only used a handful of late Greek manuscripts when they did their translation. It must be pointed out that although Erasmus only used these few manuscripts that he had available to him while he translated or he worked on his work in Basel during the compilation of his first edition, which took him a little bit over 2 years to complete. I do not know of any scholar who has properly studied this subject who would claim that Erasmus had only been exposed to these few manuscripts during his life before engaging in this translation. It must also be noted that much had happened in the near 100 years between the first edition of the Greek New Testament, composed by Erasmus, the TR, and the translation of the KJV. It is simply incorrect to understand that that after the 1516 edition of Erasmus, the next major event was the translation of the KJV. Erasmus himself admitted that there were errors in his first edition and that it had been rushed. Erasmus, however, would go on to edit his work no less than 4 more times, where Erasmus addressed many of these mistakes and issues of his first edition. These editions were completed in 1519, 1522, 1527, and 1535. William Tyndale wanted to make a translation in English available for everyone and anyone. He used the Greek text of Erasmus, the 3rd edition, to make a translation into English in 1534. Tyndale was executed by the Catholic Church in 1536 when he was strangled and his body was burned. His infamous last words were reportedly, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." Tyndale's words were considered so well translated that approximately 70% of the words that are found in the KJV New Testament are taken from his translation. Now, the work of Erasmus was continued by Robert Estienne, probably better known as Stephanus. He himself produced 4 editions of the Textus Receptus in 1546, 1549, 1550, and finally in 1551. This was followed by Theodore Beza, who also updated the TR, the Textus Receptus, a total of 9 times between 1565 and 1604. All of these updated versions of the TR were done with much more care and attention than the first edition of Erasmus. Now, the KJV translators used these updated versions during their translation process. The KJV translators also had access to the Complutensian polyglot. And furthermore, the KJV translators also had available to them, but not limited to, the Bibles of Miles Coverdale, the Coverdale Bible, John Rogers Matthews Bible, the Great Bible, the Richard Taverner's Bible, the Geneva Bible, and the Bishop's Bible, which was revised three times, I think it was. The translators also had the Catholic readings, as they had the use of the Reims Douay, or the Douay Rheims, 1582. They, of course, also had the Latin Vulgate at their disposal as well. Now, the KJV translators stated that it was never the intention of the translators to start from scratch. They were already good translations of the Bible available, and the translators wrote, "Truly, good Christian reader, we never thought from the beginning that we should need to make a new translation, nor yet to make of a bad one a good one, but to make a good one better, or out of many good ones one principal good one, not justly to be accepted against. That hath been our endeavour, that our mark." And that is the Translators to the Reader, 1611, KJV, 9th page. Now, it is true that the manuscripts, that new manuscripts have been discovered since the KJV was published. However, what needs to be stated is in these manuscripts, no new readings have been found. Nothing new in the way of what was included in the manuscripts has been discovered. The translators of the KJV had access to and used all the known readings that were at their disposal, even if they did not have all the manuscripts. The vast and overwhelming majority of these newly discovered manuscripts actually support the text of the Textus Receptus. To merely state that we have found new manuscripts that are older is simply just not stating the full truth. There are over 5,300, I think the count is 5,600 and something, manuscripts available to us today. That number changes quite often as new manuscripts are discovered. The vast majority of these, at least 95%, and it's more, probably a lot more than that, agree and support the readings of the Textus Receptus. There are, in fact, only a handful of manuscripts, maybe 45 manuscripts in total, that support the text that underlines the modern versions, and this text is itself primarily based on just two, Vaticanus and Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. So to use the argument that the KJV translators used just 6 to 10 manuscripts would be slightly hypocritical, even if it were true, which it isn't. And I would deal with the text that underlines the modern versions in another study. It is also incorrect to say that that only later manuscripts were used in the compiling of the Textus Receptus. Again, while it was maybe true that the first edition of Erasmus was based on later manuscripts, this is not true for Stephanus and Beza. Erasmus did use Codex 1 and also Minuscule 69, noting some of its readings, but Beza himself used Codex Bezae, which is dated to around 400 AD. Stephanus used Codex Origius, which is Codex L, which dates from the 8th century, and it is considered one of the most accurate copies of the Gospels. We also know that Erasmus used the biblical quotations found in the writings of the Church Fathers, including Irenaeus, which goes back all the way to the 2nd century. Also, in 1533, Erasmus was provided with a list of over 300 readings from Codex Vaticanus, which is the main manuscript of the critical and the modern text. The simple fact is that the KJV translators not only had access to, but also utilized a lot more than the 6 to 10 manuscripts that formed the first edition of Erasmus. Any claim to the contrary is just simply wrong. Thank you very much for watching. Please give this a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. I look forward to seeing you on another video. Shalom.